There's a guy out there named Fuller who created this company called Rebel Wisdon. He's done a couple documentaries on Jordan Peterson, and he's essentially building his business around Jordan Peterson, which is a brilliant business move. I applaud him for that. He does personal development work, and he's using Peterson as a platform to gain notoriety, and for good reason. I'm not necessarily questioning his motivations, although I am to a degree. And I think he's doing brilliant work, and I think that he's using Peterson inappropriately, and I'm very upset with him right now. But one of his critiques, which is I think a very legitimate critique, is that when Jordan Peterson gets upset and he gets passionate, he can be somewhat dismissive of his opponents, and he can paint them in a very ugly light. He questions their character, which is not necessarily wrong, but if you're going to question someone's character, you have to do it with some level of circumspection. Like, you have to be like, okay, I'm going to question this person's character. That's a heavy-duty thing to do, so I'm going to do it with a certain amount of precision and clarity, compassion, and equanimity in my voice tone. Like, I want to take this seriously. And Jordan Peterson sometimes slips into, can you believe that these
Okay, I've seen him do that. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so the criticism of him, and I think this is a legitimate criticism, although I think Fuller's explanation for why it happens is completely out of bounds and inappropriate, and I want to take him to task for it. But the criticism is that creates problems. That when you take on that voice tone, right, you create a backlash. Right? In my work, I'm in the victim self-righteousness dynamic, that when you go into right wrong, because he's going into right wrong, he's not saying they have legitimate points, right? He says that at times, but then he slips into, and they're wrong, I'm right, they're wrong, they're so wrong that I get to take on this voice tone, right? And I call that self-righteousness. Like,
he was called an angry white man on stage one time, because right after he took that, yeah.
Yes. And while that is a legitimate criticism, that, again, ignored the fact that it was a pen. Like, 5% accurate, 95% missing the friggin' point. Right? Because he was making good points. Okay. Right. When you've studied the Holocaust, when you've studied the deaths of hundreds of millions of people in the name of equity and Marxism, and you've seen the depravities to which human beings can go when they lose touch with the value of the individual person, when they put the person's group above their individual identity. He spent his life studying this, and he's seen the horrors of it. Like, part of it is self-righteousness, and part of it is just, look, this is horrible. This is, no, you've got to look at the sheer evil of this, right? So I understand his presentation to be partly just appropriate intensity and passion given the horrors involved. And he slips into some self-righteousness where it's not just, I am being clear and I am being passionate because of the horrors of what's going on, which is legitimate and appropriate. It's that he is self-righteous. And that comes out in the voice tones that he uses. And in my work, I say that whenever someone comes at someone self-righteously, even if what they're saying is 95% true, they will react to the self-righteousness rather than the truth. They will get triggered. And that trigger will use so much of their neurology, so much of their mental bandwidth, that they will be less able to deal with the actual argument, because they'll be more dealing with the fact that they're being shamed.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Which is a semantic disturbance, by the way.
Which is a semantic disturbance, yes, that we all have, that I say is genetically inbuilt, and so we should work around that. We should certainly resolve our semantic disturbances. The more we resolve our shame, the more capacity we have to actually deal with reality as it is, We have more bandwidth available to actually solve our problems, right? To update our maps so that they're more accurate and flexible. The more we deal with our shame, the better. Yes, yes, yes. It is a semantic disturbance, and everybody's got it. So because of that, when Jordan Peterson slips into self-righteousness, he creates an opposition that is unnecessary.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
So that is the criticism. Now, I'll say one more thing, and then let's say that that's an accurate critique. I think it is an accurate critique. I think it's a valid critique. I think Jordan Peterson can learn from that. I think everyone can learn from it. Right? I think I could learn from it. And the question is, of the people who criticize Jordan Peterson, right? You've got this set of people who criticize Jordan Peterson. A certain percentage of those would not criticize him if he did not bring a self-righteous tone. There's a certain set of people who criticize Jordan Peterson mostly because of his tone, not because of his argument.
They don't even listen to his argument because of his tone.
Correct. And the question is, what percentage of the people who criticize Jordan Peterson criticize him because of his tone, and what percentage of them criticize him because it threatens their semantic disturbance, right? And they experience him as chaotic and threatening their power and threatening their identity, and so they feel personally threatened. Like, what percentage? And I think it's actually like 5%. I think only about 5% of the people who are criticizing Peterson do it because of his tone. That 95% of the people who criticize Jordan Peterson would criticize him just as much, even if he had a perfect tone. And unless you make that distinction, unless you say, like, okay, like, what's the percentage? What's the edge case where his tone makes the difference? Unless you focus on what that percentage is, your criticism is fundamentally misplaced. And that's why I want to take Fuller to task. Because he is, to put it in the most hostile terms, he is abetting the enemy. Jordan Peterson is trying to protect the fundamentals of the game of Western civilization. Like, that is the big game. That's the game he's playing, and he's doing it with power and grace and unbelievable effectiveness in terms of rising to prominence. Having an argument rise to prominence in a culture never happened before like this. I don't think there is an example of anyone doing what Peterson has done. It is an epic achievement. And if you're going to criticize that, you have to be really careful and circumspect. And I'm pissed off at Fuller because I don't think he has been fair to Jordan Peterson. It is true that his tone creates problems. That's a legitimate criticism. The rest of what Fuller says, I am not happy with, because like, I am on the side of Western civilization. I am on the side of respecting the individual soul and treating them as inspired by Martin Luther King. Not that it's the truth, but according to their character, not their sex, not their gender, not their sexual orientation, none of that. According to their character. And that's what Jordan Peterson is about. Okay, I've done my piece. Thank you for giving me a little extra time. Thanks.
I wanted to make one just point about that. So the thing that I got when I first saw it, what I got me interested in Jordan Peterson was his interview with Kathy Newman. And that was a video where she came at him in multiple different angles, like accusing him, like totally misinterpreting what he was saying. And it was the way that he responded to that without not going into like a victimized mentality, but like there's a way he responded to her and even came back at her with a question, right? That had me really engaged with Jordan Peterson. So it was that interview over there that where I'm like, okay, that he showed up amazing. Because he showed up amazing in a way that I got, oh man, who the fuck is this guy? Like he's like how he handled himself in that interview, not like defending himself against her charges, but actually like saying what he believed and then and also coming back at her with a question or two here and there. So I wonder if you took, after what you said, if you took that video, it's like how much of that criticism after that video, like, because I didn't see a lot of victim self-righteousness and bad tones in that video. I thought he handled himself very well in that video, which I think is why it became so popular in some way, because he handled himself differently than a lot of other people would have. How much of the criticism after that video is on the content, right? And how many of those, like, right? Like how much, I guess, yeah, I don't know. But like, how much?
So to compliment you on finding an extraordinary example of the edge case so that we can examine. So what is the percentage? Mark, you're saying it's 95%, 5%. Is that accurate? We could actually use this as a test case in order to get some growth on that, right? You were impressed by exactly that issue. The fact that he didn't become self-righteous had an extraordinary impact on you and had you study him. Okay, now, I will say that video shot him into prominence in a way that eclipsed anything that had happened before. And so a lot of people, because of what he did, he was brought into prominence. I suggest that is why the New York Times did the hit piece on him. That's why Channel 4 did the hit piece on him. That's why people are coming out in droves to critique him. Because he showed up so cleanly. So there's the proximate response to that video, which is how many of the comments on that video were about his tone, and how many of them were pro-Peterson, how many of them were anti-Peterson, how many of them dealt with his tone, and how many of them dealt with his argument, right? And what I'll say is the proximate result of that was that most of the chatter, most of the responses to that video were positive to Peterson because of his tone. And that led to a spreading of his ideas, which was epic. But the more distal, reactive mode of that is that because he was calm and because his ideas spread more people came out against him because of his ideas. Right? That the criticisms of Jordan Peterson are not about his tone, except from his allies. It's only his allies that go against his tone. And Michael Eric Dyson.
Right. And I think it posed like an opportunity for Jordan Peterson, because it's like in his tone, you see in from that Kathy Newman example how powerful that video was based on his tone, right? So they're pointing out a really important factor. Hey, Jordan, if you fix this up, right? If you can lose the angry white guy tone, right, and come more from a place where he did in that Kathy Newman video, like that, being able to speak those ideas with a tone that's not self-righteous
would be better.
Would be better.
That is, I think, an inarguable point, and it is a great point, and it is probably the best criticism of Jordan Peterson as a presenter. Mm-hmm. As the vehicle for a message, I think that is the best argument against Jordan Peterson. Doesn't deal with his message at all. Right? And it's a legitimate critique. It is, in fact, I think, one of the best critiques you can offer him, and I hope that he takes it to heart, because the ideas that he's arguing for are fundamentally important and good, and I am, in that sense, a Jordan Peterson fanboy. I'm 95% on board with him. I think he gives, I don't think he gives enough airtime, enough value to the fact that this is a weapon. I don't think he gives enough airtime to the grievances of structural oppression. Right? I think that if he were to deal with that project head on, he would be able to both say what's right about it and show that 95% of it is off.